Actually have an item for new business, and it's kind of circling back to some discussions we've had going back to at least the beginning of this year, and a series of meetings that members of the administration and board had with Mr. Webster, who was volunteering his services in this regard, and we had agreed to at least give him the summer off and then come back to this in the fall, and those had to do with making some recommendations. If you can come up, Mr. Webster, regarding our monthly financial reports. So if you would like to share your recommendations with us, Mr. Webster, please do so.
Thank you. Dan Webster, Ravenscliff Road. I don't know how much, given the late hour, you want me to get into this. I can go through this in detail, or maybe it's better to pick it up largely after you've all had a chance to digest it more in next month's meeting.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting you.
Sure.
I think that's a point well taken. Some of us have had very long days, and we had a very robust discussion on some important issues earlier. And my hope would be that we could receive this from you this evening, and that you could at least give us an overview, and then we can put it on our agenda for next month's meeting to kind of come back to and give it some further attention.
Absolutely. And hopefully for next month's meeting you could post this as an attachment for the meeting so that others out in the public can see it as well. What I've done here is, subsequent to our meetings, well, over the past couple of years, my public comment, but also specifically our meetings earlier this year, one of the tasks that one of the takeaways that we determined after those meetings was that I would come up with a proposal for some different financial statement, basically the monthly reporting format. And what I've done here is, after reviewing dozens and dozens of different financial reports that are put out by other school districts around the country, just to try and figure out what the best practices were, but also being sensitive to what Mr. Vail and his team put together now. I've made some proposals in this 3-page memo, and then in the exhibits that are attached, with just some suggestions as to how largely the current reports could be modified to become more user-friendly and more informative. The principal thing coming out of this is, as I've said many times before, is it's important to have the business administrator put together a clear and concise summary or narrative that goes with the financial statements, that highlights things that you as a board or you as a committee should be looking at or focused on. If there are trends that he's noticing, if there's a particularly large expense or revenue variance that hadn't been anticipated, just to keep you apprised of what's going on financially, so that when you get the financial information, which can be very voluminous, you have a better sense of where to look and what to look at and the types of questions to ask. So in this package, I've included oh, by the way, I will note that beginning in July Mr. Vail started including some narrative with the summary financial statements, and I thought that was very helpful. I've made some comments in Exhibit C. I didn't focus on the entire August package here. I looked specifically at revenues here to begin with, because this was time consuming and I didn't want to waste a lot of time on something until we had a fuller discussion about it. So if everybody thinks this is the right direction, that was the idea, to sort of get something on the table to start talking about. But I gave some ideas on Exhibit C, what Mr. Vail calls a synopsis, I call the narrative, some other areas, some ways he might have improved that to make it a little bit more user-friendly, some other areas based on the August financials that he might have addressed. So please take a look at that. I think one of the most useful things here is if you look at Exhibit C, which is the new financial reporting format that he started using in August. You're able very simply in Excel to do some really cool visual graphical types of things. If you look at the Radnor Township monthly financial report, they have a lot of graphs in there that allow you for every line item, along with a narrative, to see how things have changed over time. And I think this is a simple way that requires, once you have the template built, which I've done here, it really requires no additional work on a monthly basis. but it allows the user of this report, through the length of these bars within the cells, to have a sense of, you know, how things are stacking up against the prior years. So take a look through that. I've also included here an example.
Just one addition to what you're saying there. There is a feature within the new software we purchased to show some of this stuff graphically. I haven't really used it or looked at it, but I think it would lend itself to this kind of recommendation.
Terrific. Good.
Yep, good. What wasn't included in the August statements but had been included in prior years or prior months was a more summarized version of the financials. And while I think the detail is useful and should be available to the committee and the public, I think you do need to have some sort of summary. So I've proposed in Exhibit B just a couple very simple changes to the summary information that Mr. Vail had been producing in what were called, it's presented in Exhibit A, the old way, the Summary Revenue and Expenditure Comparison Report. So I've just mocked something up in Exhibit B. And then Exhibit E, Exhibit D is the current fund profile, so the summary of what the balances were at the beginning of the period and are at the end of the period for all the various different funds. I've mocked up in Exhibit E, again, some very simple changes to that I think provide some of what Ms. Michelson was asking about, and this doesn't take the place of more detail. I've given some examples in Exhibit F of how that might look, but it does provide a little bit more information on these fund balances and how they've changed from the beginning of the period to the end of the period. The most significant thing on this Exhibit E is, for some reason, the fund balance, the year-to-date activity only was through the prior month. So if this were the August report, which this is, if you look at Exhibit D, the year-to-date amount only went through the end of July, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it should go through the end of August, so you see truly what happened in the month and what's happened year-to-date for August, and then the July numbers would be in the July report. Exhibit G is a sample of a dashboard. This can take all sorts of different forms, but to the extent there was something that the committee felt was, or the board felt was important to have a sense of, I know that the district's moved towards some dashboard type application over the past year or so. This could be a way of simply and visually highlighting some things. Exhibit H is just an example of how another district does the narrative, which I thought was fairly well done. And Exhibit I won't get into much detail, but this is a fairly standard format of how many districts, this happens to be, I guess, a statewide mandate for Alabama, but there are many districts that have a similar type of format, how they present their revenues, their expenses, and then at the bottom of that sheet, they include the changes in overall fund balances, or in this case, it's by specific fund, which I think is a really useful, this is the kind of information that you'll see in the audit. I would think with the financial software it could be done on a monthly basis, but it's a good way to track what's happening in each fund and the detail that makes that up in just a few pages. And then lastly, Exhibit J is an example of budget transfers, and I know that's something that the committee's talked about before. The budget is approved in May or June, and then throughout the year, historically there have been changes, reallocations within the budget, not that changes the total amount, but that reallocates within the various line items. And this is an example of how TE does it. I'm not sure if there's something that Radnor does. It hasn't been in the financial reports, so maybe they already have a similar report. But I thought it was interesting the way TE lays out their, this is kind of like the revenue and expenditure summary that has been in past monthly reports, but you'll see a couple columns here that show what the budget was, and then transfers to and from, that is within different line items in the budget. And I thought that was useful. It just, it's helpful to be part, I think, as part of the monthly financial package to show for the year to date and perhaps for the month what has been reallocated, what's been approved to be changed. I know this goes through, or I think this goes through board action, but this would be a nice way to summarize that. Any questions?
I don't have any. Do you folks have any?
Thank you for spending the time to do
Sure.
this.
I think we should consider, when we post the agenda for the next meeting, to go ahead and scan this in and put this on there.
I sent you the PDF, so.
Yep. Okay. Good. All right. Now I think we're at the final, the second round of public comment.